Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab. Now let's begin. Douglas Connor checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The departure lounge at the cruise terminal buzzed with excited families hauling luggage toward the gangway, but his mind was elsewhere, back at the house on Maple Street where his 9-year-old son Kenny sat with Aunt Delia. "You're doing it again," Kelly said, touching his arm. His wife's auburn hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the terminal windows. "Kenny will be fine. He's watched Aunt Delia before." Douglas wanted to believe her. He'd been married to Kelly for 11 years, and in that time, he'd learned to trust her judgment about her family. But something felt off about this arrangement, a sensation he couldn't quite articulate without sounding paranoid. "I know," he said, forcing a smile. "It's just a week. I'm being ridiculous." Gary and Carol Hutchinson emerged from the restroom, Carol clutching her oversized purse like it contained the crown jewels. Douglas's mother-in-law had aged well, 62, but could pass for 50, with the same sharp features as her younger sister Delia. Gary, by contrast, looked every day of his 65 years, his weathered face speaking to decades managing a construction supply business. "Douglas, stop fretting," Carol said, reading him instantly. "Delia's been in that wheelchair for 3 years. Kenny just needs to bring her meals, keep her company, maybe read to her. It's good for him to learn responsibility." That was the part that gnawed Douglas. 3 years ago, Delia Hutchinson had suffered what doctors called a catastrophic neurological event while hiking alone in the Cascade Mountains. Search and rescue found her 2 days later, unresponsive and barely alive. The official story was that she'd fallen, struck her head, and developed complications that left her paralyzed from the neck down. She'd been living in the Hutchinson family's guest house ever since, cared for by rotating nurses and family members. Douglas worked as a forensic accountant. Not the most exciting profession, but it had trained him to spot inconsistencies, to notice when numbers didn't add up. And something about Delia's situation had never quite computed. The medical reports were vague. The accident scene photos showed minimal evidence of a fall. And Delia herself, when he'd visited, seemed to watch him with an intensity that paralyzed people shouldn't possess. But he'd kept those observations to himself. Questioning a disabled woman's condition wasn't exactly the path to family harmony. Final boarding call for Caribbean Dream. The announcement echoed through the terminal. Kenny's voice crackled through Douglas's phone speaker. He'd called to say goodbye one last time. "Dad, do I really have to stay the whole week? Can't I just go to Josh Mueller's house?" Josh was Kenny's best friend, a sensible kid from a sensible family. Douglas wished that had been the plan, but Kelly's parents had insisted. Delia needed the company, they'd said. She'd been so lonely since the accident. It would mean so much to her. "Buddy, it's just 7 days," Douglas said, stepping away from the group. "Watch some movies with Aunt Delia, show her your card tricks. Before you know it, we'll be back with stories about snorkeling and maybe even a shark tooth. Promise you'll call every night. Twice a day if you want. Love you, champ." "Love you too, Dad." The cruise ship was magnificent. 12 decks of luxury, pools, theaters, and restaurants that Carol had been rhapsodizing about for months. This was their big celebration: Gary's retirement, Carol's birthday, and Kelly's recent promotion to senior architect at Morrison & Wright. Douglas had negotiated the time off from his firm, where he'd been investigating a healthcare fraud case that was starting to reveal connections to a wider network. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Douglas stood at the rail, watching Seattle shrink into the distance. His phone buzzed, a text from Kenny showing a photo of Aunt Delia in her wheelchair, motionless as always, with Kenny making a silly face beside her. "Day 1. All good," the message read. Douglas texted back a thumbs up and tried to silence the voice in his head that whispered, "Something is wrong." The first 2 days passed pleasantly enough. Douglas and Kelly fell into the cruise ship rhythm. Breakfast buffets that could feed armies, excursions to Vancouver's gardens, evening shows where Carol laughed too loud and Gary fell asleep. Douglas called Kenny twice daily. Each time, his son sounded fine if a bit bored. "She mostly sleeps," Kenny reported. "I've been reading her The Lightning Thief. I think she likes it, but it's hard to tell. She can't really respond much." "How are the nurses?" "There's only been one so far. Mrs. Foster comes in the morning and evening to help with, bathroom stuff and medicine. Otherwise, it's just me and Aunt Delia watching TV. Patsy Foster was the primary caregiver, a stern woman in her 50s who'd been with the family for 2 years. Douglas had met her a few times, professional, efficient, not particularly warm, but competent, which was what mattered. On the third evening, as the ship sailed toward its next port, Douglas sat in the cabin while Kelly showered, scrolling through emails. His work partner, a sharp lawyer named Roland Farmer, had sent an encrypted file about the healthcare fraud case. Douglas opened it, skimming the contents. And there, buried in a financial trail, was a name that made him sit up straight, Delia Hutchinson. He read it again, certain he'd misread. But no, there it was, listed as a consultant for Whitmore Medical Group between 2018 and 2021, the same organization Douglas had been investigating for billing fraud. The same organization that had mysteriously collapsed just before Delia's accident. Douglas's pulse quickened. This could be coincidence. Delia had worked in healthcare administration before her injury. Kelly had mentioned it vaguely. But the timing. He fired off an encrypted text to Roland. Need deep background on Delia Hutchinson. Everything. Medical records, employment history, financial statements. Priority 1. Kelly emerged from the bathroom in a cloud of steam, wrapped in a plush robe. Who are you texting? Just work stuff. Roland found something interesting. She sat beside him, smelling of vanilla and coconut. Babe, we're on vacation. Can it wait? You're right. Sorry. He set the phone aside, but his mind was already racing through possibilities. If Delia had been involved in the Whitmore scheme, if she'd known it was about to implode, what if her accident hadn't been an accident at all? The fourth day started with an excursion to a private beach in Cozumel. Douglas tried to focus on the moment. The crystalline water, Kelly's laughter as she challenged her father to a swimming race, Carol collecting shells with the enthusiasm of a child. But his phone felt like a lead weight in his pocket. He checked it during lunch, finding a message from Roland. Call when you can. Secure line. Douglas excused himself, walking down the beach until he was out of earshot. Roland answered on the first ring. Tell me you're sitting down, Roland said. I'm on a beach. What did you find? Delia Hutchinson was more than a consultant. She was the chief financial architect at Whitmore. Everything ran through her. The phantom billing, the Medicare fraud, the whole operation. We're talking tens of millions, Douglas. Maybe more. Douglas's mouth went dry. She set it up? Genius-level work, actually. Layered shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified records that would have passed any standard audit. Except someone at the FBI got a tip 3 years ago. They started investigating, getting close. And then, conveniently, Delia has her little hiking accident and becomes a vegetable. You think she faked it? I think it's an awfully convenient way to dodge a federal investigation. Can't prosecute someone who can't stand trial, who can't even communicate. The case against Whitmore fell apart without her testimony. Most of the evidence was circumstantial without her to explain the financial architecture. Douglas watched a child building a sandcastle, the normalcy of it surreal against what he was hearing. So she's been faking paralysis for 3 years? Living in my in-laws' guest house, pretending to be helpless. There's more. I pulled her medical records, took some creative interpretation of privacy laws, but I figured you'd want to know. The neurological damage? It's real, but not what everyone thinks. She has some nerve damage in her spine, probably from the fall. But according to the original ER docs, it was manageable. Maybe some chronic pain, reduced mobility. Nothing close to full paralysis. Then why? The report changed. 2 weeks after admission, suddenly it's catastrophic and irreversible. New doctor signed off on it. Dr. Gilbert Steele, who happens to have had his medical license suspended a year later for falsifying disability claims. Douglas felt ice in his veins despite the tropical heat. She paid him off. That'd be my guess. Creates the perfect cover. She's not hiding from the law. She's a tragic victim. Meanwhile, the money she stole is probably sitting in accounts nobody's found yet, waiting for the statute of limitations to run out or for the investigation to officially close. Christ. Carol and Gary have been taking care of her, paying for her nurses, treating her like family, while she's been playing them the whole time. Yeah, Douglas, there's something else. The tone in Roland's voice made Douglas's stomach clench. What? I looked into that nurse, Patsy Foster. She doesn't exist. I mean, there's a Patsy Foster with nursing credentials, but she died in 2019. Whoever's at that house using her identity, it's not her. Douglas's world tilted. I need to call Kenny. Do it. And Douglas? If Delia's been faking this long, she's dangerous. People don't go to that extreme unless they're willing to do whatever it takes to protect themselves. Douglas hung up and immediately dialed Kenny. It rang, and rang, and rang. Come on, buddy. Pick up, Douglas muttered. Voicemail. He tried again. Same result. He called the house line. No answer. A cold sweat broke out across his back. He checked the time. 2:47 p.m. in Mexico, 1:47 p.m. in Seattle. Kenny should be awake, should have his phone nearby. Douglas had made him promise. He called Kelly's phone, watching her in the distance, seeing her check it and wave at him. He gestured frantically, and she jogged over, concern creasing her face. What's wrong? Kenny's not answering. Neither is the house line. He's probably just out in the yard, or his phone died. You know how he forgets to charge it. Or something's wrong. Douglas pulled up the security app on his phone. 6 months ago, after a break-in scare in the neighborhood, he'd installed a comprehensive system at the house. Cameras, motion sensors, door alarms. Carol had protested the expense, but Douglas had insisted. Now he pulled up the live feed. The guest house appeared on screen. The windows were dark. He switched to the front door camera. The door was closed. The porch was empty. Nothing seemed amiss. He switched to the interior camera in the living room, the one angled to capture the main space where Delia's hospital bed sat. The bed was empty. The wheelchair sat in the corner, unused. And Delia was nowhere in sight. Doug, what is it? Kelly leaned in, looking at the screen. Where is she? Where's Kenny? He cycled through the other cameras. Kitchen, hallway, the room where Kenny was sleeping. All empty. He switched to the backyard camera. There, movement in the guest house's back bedroom, the one that had been converted to storage. The door was closed, but he could see light beneath it. Douglas zoomed in on the main house camera, the one covering the driveway. Patsy Foster's car was gone. According to the schedule, she wasn't due back until 6 p.m. I'm calling the police, Douglas said. And telling them what? That you can't reach your son for an hour and saw empty rooms on a camera? She was right, but every instinct screamed at him. Something's wrong, Kelly. I can feel it. Then call the neighbors. Ask someone to check on them. Douglas scrolled through his contacts, finding Lance Rivera, who lived 3 houses down. Lance answered after 2 rings, sounding slightly out of breath. Doug, how's the cruise? Lance, I need a huge favor. Can you go to my house right now? I can't reach Kenny, and I'm worried. Sure. Give me 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes stretched into eternity. Douglas paced the beach, ignoring Kelly's attempts to calm him, watching the security feed obsessively. Nothing moved. No one appeared. His phone rang. Lance. I'm here, buddy. Front door's locked. I rang the bell a few times. No answer. Want me to use the spare key? I know you keep one under the frog statue. Yes. Please. Douglas heard fumbling, then the sound of a door opening. Lance's breathing echoed through the phone. I'm in. Calling out for Kenny. No response. Checking the main rooms. Kitchen's clean, living room's empty. I'm heading to the guest house now. Static crackled. Then Lance's voice, lower. Doug, the guest house door is locked. From the inside. I can see light under it, but nobody's answering when I knock. Break it down. What? I can't just. Lance, please. I'll pay for any damages. Something's wrong. A long pause. Then, all right. Give me a second. Douglas heard with splintering. A crash. Then Lance's startled exclamation. Jesus Christ. What? What is it? Doug, I found Kenny. He's okay. He's breathing, but he's unconscious. And there's a woman here, looks like that aunt everyone talks about, and she's definitely not paralyzed. She's trying to climb out the window. Should I hold her there? Call 911. I'm recording this. But Delia was already gone. Lance's camera, Douglas had demanded he switch to FaceTime, showed the open window, a screen torn out, and in the distance, a figure running across the backyard toward the alley with surprising speed for someone who'd supposedly been paralyzed for 3 years. The EMTs arrived 12 minutes later. By then, Kenny had woken up, groggy and confused. The paramedics checked him over. No injuries, but he'd been drugged. They found traces of benzodiazepines in the glass of juice beside his makeshift bed in the storage room. Douglas and Kelly were on the next flight out of Cozumel, Gary and Carol in shock, and arguing in low tones about what they'd witnessed via Lance's shaky phone camera. The cruise was over. Everything was over. Douglas's hands shook as he booked the flights, his mind already racing ahead. Delia had drugged his son, locked him in a room, had been faking disability for 3 years, living in his family's house, playing them all for fools. The question that haunted him, that would haunt him through the entire flight home. What had she whispered to Kenny before he called screaming at 2 a.m.? Because by the time they'd gotten Lance to the house, Kenny's phone log showed 4 missed calls from Douglas that night. Calls that never came, that never rang, because Kenny never made that 2 a.m. call. The synopsis had been wrong, Douglas realized with dawning horror. Kenny hadn't called. He hadn't had the chance. And that meant whatever Delia had planned, whatever she'd whispered to his son, Douglas had interrupted it before it could be completed. The question was, what came next? Kenny sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket despite the June warmth, his face pale and drawn. Douglas sat beside him, arm around his son's shoulders, while Kelly paced the living room and Detective Austin Frost took notes in a worn leather pad. Start from the beginning, Frost said. He was mid-40s, graying at the temples, with the weary demeanor of someone who'd seen too much. When did things change? Kenny's voice came out small. The first day was normal. Aunt Delia just sat there. Like always. I read to her, brought her lunch. Mrs. Foster came by in the morning and evening. Everything was fine. And the second day? Mrs. Foster didn't come in the morning. Aunt Delia told me. Kenny stopped, swallowed hard. She talked to me. Just a whisper at first, but she said Mrs. Foster had a family emergency and wouldn't be back for a while. She said I should keep it secret because it might worry Mom and Dad. Douglas felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. Delia had been grooming Kenny, isolating him. Did she move that day? Frost asked. Not much. Just her hands a little, her head. She said the paralysis was getting better, that it was a miracle, but the doctors didn't know yet. She made it sound like a fun secret. What happened on the third day? Kenny's hands tightened on the blanket. She got out of bed, walked around, made herself breakfast. It was so weird, seeing her move after all that time. She told me we were going to play a game. She locked all the doors, said we couldn't let anyone in because they wouldn't understand about her miracle recovery. Kelly stopped pacing. She locked you in. I thought it was weird, but she said it was part of the game. She was really nice at first, making me food, letting me watch whatever I wanted on TV. But then she started asking me questions. What kind of questions? Frost leaned forward. About Dad. About his work, his computer passwords, where he kept important papers. I told her I didn't know, and she got different. Not mean exactly, but intense. She said it was really important, that people were after her, and she needed to protect herself. She said Dad had information that could help her, and if I loved her, I'd help her find it. Douglas's blood ran cold. She'd been after his case files. The Whitmore investigation. Of course. I kept telling her I didn't know. Kenny continued, tears welling in his eyes. She got frustrated. Started going through Dad's office, making a mess. I tried to call you, but she'd taken my phone. She said I couldn't talk to anyone until I helped her. That's when you moved to the storage room? Frost asked. Kenny nodded. Yesterday afternoon. She said we were going to stay there until Mom and Dad got back, and that I couldn't tell anyone what happened. She said if I told, something bad would happen to Grandma Carol. She said she knew secrets about everyone, and she'd ruin our family if I didn't keep quiet. What about the juice? Douglas asked, though he could barely get the words out. She gave it to me last night. Said it would help me sleep. I remember drinking it, and then, nothing until Mr. Rivera was shaking me awake. Frost closed his notebook. Mrs. Connor, can you get me that glass? It's evidence now. After the detective left, promising to issue an APB for Delia and investigate the fake nurse, Douglas sat in his office, staring at the chaos. Files were scattered across the floor, his locked cabinets forced open, papers everywhere. She'd been thorough, but sloppy in her desperation. He began gathering the documents, piecing together what she'd been looking for. The Whitmore files were rifled through, but he'd kept the most damning evidence encrypted on a drive she wouldn't have known about, a drive currently locked in his safe deposit box at the bank. His phone rang. Roland, please tell me you have good news, Douglas said. Define good. I tracked down the real story on Patsy Foster. She's not dead. That was a different Patsy Foster. This one, turns out, is Delia's old college roommate. Roommate went off-grid about 6 months ago, hasn't been seen since. I'm guessing she's either being paid to disappear or Delia did something to her. Yeah, the police are looking into it. But there's more. I found Delia's offshore accounts. Well, some of them. There's at least $40 million scattered across Cayman, Switzerland, and Singapore. Money that was definitely stolen from Whitmore. Can we freeze them? Already working on it with the FBI. But here's the thing. Most of that money's been moved in the last 6 months. She's been liquidating, preparing for something. I think she was getting ready to run. Douglas thought about the timeline. Kenny said she was asking about my files, my passwords. She wanted to know what I had on her. Makes sense. If she found out you were investigating Whitmore, discovered you were getting close to connecting her to the fraud, she'd panic. Maybe accelerate whatever escape plan she had. But why stay? Why not just disappear 3 years ago with the money? Because she couldn't walk, probably. Not well enough to flee the country, navigate airports, live on the run. The initial fall, even if she exaggerated the paralysis, likely did real damage. She needed time to heal, to regain strength. The paralysis act gave her that time. Kept her off everyone's radar, bought her protection from prosecution, let her slowly transfer and hide the money while she recovered. Douglas saw it now, the cold calculation. Delia had used his family as her shield, manipulating her own sister's guilt and love, all while plotting her escape. And Kenny had been collateral damage, a tool to get information when she realized Douglas might expose her. We need to find her before she gets out of the country, Douglas said. FBI's on it. They flagged her passport, got her on every watch list. She's not getting on a plane. But Douglas wasn't so sure. A woman who'd faked paralysis for 3 years, who'd created false identities and stolen millions, wasn't going to let something like a flagged passport stop her. He needed to think like Delia. Where would she go? 3 days passed. Delia remained at large. The media caught wind of the story. The miraculous healing of a paralyzed woman, now wanted for fraud, drugging a child, and various other charges that piled up as investigators dug deeper. It became a spectacle, the kind that Douglas hated, with news vans parked outside his house and reporters shouting questions whenever anyone emerged. Carol Hutchinson took it hardest. Her sister, the person she'd cared for with such devotion, had been playing her all along. She barely left her bedroom, while Gary dealt with the practical matters, changing locks, reviewing their finances to see if Delia had stolen from them too. She had. About $200,000. And apologizing to Douglas with the defeated air of a man watching his world crumble. Kenny saw a therapist, Dr. Roger Duncan, 3 times that first week. He was resilient, Douglas told himself, but the shadows in his son's eyes worried him. Kenny flinched at unexpected sounds, kept his bedroom door locked, and asked repeatedly if Delia was really gone. We'll catch her, Douglas promised, though he wasn't sure he believed it. On the 4th day, Roland called with news. We found Patsy Foster, the real one, alive. Barely. She's in a hospital in Spokane, beaten within an inch of her life. Some hikers found her near a campground. She's been able to give a statement. Delia approached her 6 months ago, offered her money to disappear for a year. When Foster refused, Delia attacked her, left her for dead in the woods. Jesus. It gets worse. Foster says Delia told her she needed to clean up loose ends before leaving the country. That you and your family were on that list. The words hit Douglas like a physical blow. She was going to hurt Kenny. Or worse. The drugs she gave him. The dose was carefully measured. Not enough to kill, but enough to keep him sedated. Forensics thinks she was keeping him drugged until she could get what she needed from you. And then, Roland didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Douglas looked at Kenny, who was building a Lego set at the dining room table with fierce concentration. His son. His brilliant, brave son who'd survived something unthinkable. We need to draw her out, Douglas said. What? She's desperate. She knows we're onto her, that her accounts are frozen, that she can't use her passport. But she's smart, and she's patient. She'll go to ground, wait for things to cool down, then try again. Douglas, you're not seriously suggesting. She wants my files. She thinks I have evidence that can connect her to Whitmore beyond what's already public. Evidence that might reveal where she's hidden money or implicate her in other crimes. Do you? Douglas thought about the encrypted drive. Some of it. Enough to be dangerous to her. What if we let her think she can get it? That's insane. She's already proved she's willing to hurt people. You want to make yourself bait. I want to end this. Kenny can't heal if she's still out there. None of us can. We know she's still in the area. She's too smart to run without a solid escape plan, and we've cut off her most obvious routes. She'll be watching us, looking for an opportunity. This is a terrible idea. You have a better one? Roll inside. Let me talk to the FBI. If we do this, we do it right. Controlled environment, agents everywhere, no chances. But Douglas was already formulating a different plan. The FBI was bound by rules, protocols, procedures. Delia had operated outside those constraints for years. If he wanted to catch her, he needed to think like her, calculating, ruthless, willing to take risks others wouldn't. That night, after Kenny was asleep and Kelly was on the phone with her mother, Douglas went to his office and opened his laptop. He drafted an email, encrypted it, and sent it to an address he'd discovered buried in Delia's financial records, a burner account she'd used for anonymous communications. I know what you want. I have files you haven't found, evidence that could implicate you in things worse than Whitmore. I'm willing to trade. Meet me at the Cascade View trailhead, the one where you had your accident, tomorrow at midnight. Come alone, and I'll give you everything. Try anything, and it all goes to the FBI in the morning. Your choice. Douglas. It was bait, and dangerous bait at that. But he'd learned something about predators from his years investigating fraud. They couldn't resist the opportunity to eliminate a threat. Delia would come, if only to silence him permanently. He just needed to make sure he was the one walking away. Douglas stood in the parking lot of Cascade View as dusk settled over the mountains, mist curling between the trees like ghostly fingers. The trailhead where Delia had supposedly had her accident 3 years ago was remote, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry and bodies might not be found for weeks. Which was precisely why he'd chosen it. Roland had argued against this, threatened to call the FBI himself. Douglas had convinced him to wait one day, to let him try his way first. He'd left a note for Kelly, to be opened if he wasn't back by morning, explaining everything. She'd kill him for this, assuming Delia didn't beat her to it. He checked his phone, 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until the meeting time. He activated the recording app, tucked the phone in his jacket pocket, and started up the trail. The path climbed steeply, winding through Douglas firs and western hemlocks. His breath came hard. Too many years behind a desk, but adrenaline kept him moving. He'd hiked this trail once before, years ago, trying to understand what had really happened to Delia. The official story was that she'd slipped near the summit, but he'd never believed it. The trail was well maintained, not particularly dangerous for an experienced hiker. Now he suspected she'd staged it, created the injury herself to provide cover for her disappearing act. Except she'd misjudged, hurt herself worse than intended, and had to commit fully to the deception. The trail opened into a small clearing near the accident site, a rocky outcropping with a sheer drop on one side and forest on the other. Douglas positioned himself with his back to the trees, giving himself an escape route if needed. At 11:59, he heard footsteps. Delia emerged from the shadows, and Douglas barely recognized her. Gone was the pallid, motionless woman from the wheelchair. This Delia moved with predatory grace, her lean frame suggesting someone who'd been working out intensively. Her dark hair was cut short, her clothes practical, hiking boots, dark pants, a jacket with too many pockets. "Hello, Douglas," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Clever, choosing this spot. Symbolic." "Where it all started," Douglas replied, keeping his voice level despite the fear coursing through him. "I wanted to understand. 3 years ago, you came here to create an alibi, to fake an injury that would protect you from federal prosecution. Not fake. I miscalculated the fall. Broke 3 vertebrae, severed nerves I didn't mean to touch. Spent 6 months in agony, wondering if I'd ever walk again. But pain is just information, Douglas. The body heals if you give it time. And I had plenty of time, lying in that bed, letting everyone think I was helpless. While you stole from your own family, terrorized my son." Delia's expression didn't change. "Kenny is a sweet boy. I would have preferred not to involve him, but you forced my hand. When I discovered you were investigating Whitmore, that you'd connected me to the fraud, I knew I had to act. The files you have, they could ruin everything. Years of planning gone. The 40 million you stole, you mean? I earned that money. Do you have any idea how brilliant you have to be to architect what I created? Whitmore was bleeding Medicare dry before I arrived. I just optimized the process. Made it efficient. The money was mine by right. Douglas felt anger flare, but kept it contained. You drugged my son. I sedated him. There's a difference. He was never in real danger, not from me. I just needed time to find your files, and he wasn't cooperating. She took a step closer. Where are they, Douglas? The evidence you claim to have. Safe. Somewhere you'll never find them. He patted his jacket. But I have something else here. A key and an address. Where to find every file, every record, everything I've compiled. Give me what I want, and it's yours. And what do you want? Confession. On record. Tell me what you did, all of it, and you can have the files. Destroy them, flee the country, I don't care. Just leave my family alone. Delia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You think I'm stupid? The moment I confess, you'll use it against me. I'm recording this conversation, Douglas said calmly. I have been since you arrived. So you've already incriminated yourself. The question is whether you want to walk away with the chance to escape, or whether you want to gamble that you can take the key from me by force. Her hand moved to her pocket, and Douglas saw the glint of metal, a knife. I have people watching, Douglas bluffed. FBI agents at the trailhead. You hurt me, they'll be here in seconds. You're lying. You didn't bring the FBI because you're breaking about a dozen laws with this little meeting. Coercion, extortion, obstruction of justice. You came alone because you're an idiot who thinks he can play games with someone like me. She moved fast, covering the distance between them in 3 strides, the knife aimed at his chest. Douglas dodged left, his foot catching on a root, sending him sprawling. The knife whistled past his ear. You're not the clever one, Douglas, Delia hissed, advancing. You're the amateur who stumbled into something beyond his understanding. Douglas rolled, grabbed a rock, and threw it. It caught Delia in the shoulder, making her stagger. He scrambled to his feet, backing toward the cliff edge. The files aren't here, he said, breathing hard. And there is no key. But this conversation? It's been streaming live to Roland Farmer's encrypted server. Every word you've said, every threat you've made, recorded and backed up in multiple locations. You just confessed to everything. Delia's face twisted with rage. She lunged, and Douglas sidestepped, but the ground beneath him crumbled, the cliff edge, unstable after recent rains. He felt himself falling, grabbed desperately at a root, and caught hold just as his body swung out over the drop. Delia stood above him, backlit by moonlight, the knife glinting in her hand. You should have stayed on your cruise, Douglas. Should have let sleeping dogs lie, like you let my son lie drugged and terrified. He was leverage. Nothing personal. Douglas felt his grip slipping. The root was wet, his hands cramping. But he saw something in the trees beyond Delia, movement, shadows. Help, or wishful thinking. You're going to fall, Delia said, crouching at the edge. Just like I did. Except you won't survive to fake an injury. Tragic accident. The grieving father who came looking for answers and found only death. Like you faked Patsy Foster's disappearance? We found her, by the way. She's alive. Talking. Delia's expression flickered. Impossible. Very possible. She's in protective custody, telling investigators everything. About how you attacked her, left her for dead. About your plans to eliminate loose ends. About me. About Kenny. That bitch was supposed to be dead? Yeah, she was. But unlike you, some people are actually hard to kill. The shadows in the trees materialized into figures, federal agents in tactical gear, weapons drawn, closing in on Delia's position. Douglas almost laughed with relief. Roland had come through after all, had brought the cavalry despite Douglas's insistence on handling this alone. Delia Hutchinson, a voice boomed through a megaphone. Put down the weapon and step away from the edge. Delia looked around, calculating. For a moment, Douglas thought she might just jump, take her chances with the fall rather than face arrest. But then she dropped the knife, raised her hands, and stepped back. Agents swarmed the clearing. Someone grabbed Douglas's wrists, hauled him back up and over the edge. He lay on solid ground, gasping, while they cuffed Delia and read her rights. Special Agent Randolph Haas, who'd been leading the FBI's investigation into Whitmore, crouched beside Douglas. That was incredibly stupid, he said without heat. But effective. We've got everything on tape, the confession, the assault, the threats. She's done. My family, Douglas managed. Safe. We've had eyes on your house since you sent that email. She came alone, just like you thought. Delia was being led away, but she turned, her eyes finding Douglas. "This isn't over," she said. "I have contingencies, Douglas. Plans within plans. You think you've won, but—" "Shut up," Agent Haas said, not unkindly. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." They took her down the mountain, and Douglas followed on shaky legs, his phone already out to call Kelly. The trial came 4 months later. By then, investigators had unraveled the full scope of Delia's schemes, not just the Whitmore fraud, but half a dozen other operations spanning 2 decades. She'd been a ghost in the financial underworld, using her position in healthcare administration to exploit every loophole and vulnerability. The $40 million Douglas had found was only a fraction. The real number was closer to $80 million, spread across dozens of accounts worldwide. She'd planned to disappear completely, Douglas learned during the trial. Fake her death, create a new identity, live out her years on a beach somewhere warm. The Paralysis Act was meant to buy time for healing and planning. Then Kenny's presence had given her a new opportunity, leverage against Douglas, a way to eliminate evidence and threats before vanishing. But she'd underestimated Douglas. That was her fatal mistake. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Douglas testified, as did Kenny, though the judge allowed his testimony via video to spare him the trauma of facing Delia again. Patsy Foster testified from a wheelchair, still recovering from her injuries. Carol Hutchinson testified too, tears streaming down her face as she recounted how Delia had manipulated her grief and guilt. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: fraud, assault, attempted murder, child endangerment, money laundering. The list went on. At sentencing, the judge, a stern woman named Cheryl Reynolds, looked at Delia with undisguised contempt. "You exploited the trust of your family, endangered a child, and showed no remorse for any of your actions. You faked a disability to evade justice, all while stealing money meant to help vulnerable people. I hereby sentence you to 45 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole." Delia's face remained impassive. As they led her away, she glanced once at Douglas, sitting in the gallery with his family. No threats this time, no promises of future vengeance. Just a look of cold assessment, as if she were calculating where she'd gone wrong. Douglas met her eyes and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger. Just relief that it was over. 6 months after the trial, Douglas stood in Kenny's bedroom, helping him pack for summer camp. His son was laughing, excited about 2 weeks of hiking and kayaking with Josh Mueller. The shadows were gone from his eyes, the therapy had helped, and Dr. Duncan said Kenny was showing remarkable resilience. "Dad," Kenny said, folding a t-shirt, "do you think Aunt Delia thinks about us?" It was the first time he'd mentioned her in months. Douglas sat on the bed, considering the question. "Probably, but not the way you think. People like her don't feel guilt or regret the way we do. She probably thinks about what she did wrong tactically, not morally." "That's sad." "It is," Douglas agreed. "But it's not our problem anymore. She's gone, locked away where she can't hurt anyone. I'm glad you found her. I'm glad you stopped her." Douglas pulled his son into a hug. "Me too, buddy. Me too." Downstairs, Kelly was making dinner, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes drifted up the stairs. Carol and Gary were visiting. They came by often now, trying to rebuild what Delia had broken. The family was healing, slowly, finding its way back to something resembling normal. Douglas's phone buzzed. Roland, with news about a new case, a pharmaceutical company with suspicious billing practices. Douglas looked at the message and smiled. Back to work, back to what he did best. But tonight was for family. The cases could wait. As they sat down to dinner, Kenny told a joke that made everyone laugh, and Douglas looked around the table at these people he loved. Kelly, strong and beautiful. Her parents, humbled but present. And Kenny, his brilliant, brave son, who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side. "Toast," Douglas said, raising his glass. "To family. To second chances. To moving forward." "To moving forward," they echoed. And for the first time in months, Douglas believed it. 1 year later, Douglas received a letter. Prison mail, forwarded through his lawyer. He almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of him. He opened it in his office, alone. "Douglas," it read in Delia's precise handwriting. "I've had time to think about what happened. You should know I never intended to seriously harm Kenny. I'm many things, but not a monster. I made calculated decisions that happened to involve your family, and for that, I'm not sorry exactly, but I recognize you had to respond as you did. You beat me. That's rare. I want you to know I respect that. In another life, we might have been allies. You have the mind for it, the ability to see patterns, to plan several moves ahead. It's a shame you use it for such boring purposes. They're transferring me soon to a maximum security facility in Montana. I'll spend the rest of my life there, presumably, but I've survived worse. And who knows? 45 years is a long time. Things change. People escape. Miracles happen. Consider this a warning, Douglas. Or a promise. Or just words from a bored prisoner with nothing but time. Interpret it however you like. Regards, Delia. Douglas read it twice, then fed it into his office shredder. Let her have her fantasies. Let her imagine escapes and revenge. Reality was that she was locked away, her money seized, her plans destroyed. She had nothing left but words on paper. He went home to his family and didn't think about Delia Hutchinson again. Not until 3 years later, when he received a phone call from Agent Haas. Douglas, I need you to sit down. There's been an incident at the Montana facility. Delia's been killed. Stabbing during a fight with another inmate. She's dead. Douglas felt the words wash over him, trying to process them. You're sure? Body's been identified. It's over, Douglas. Really over this time. After he hung up, Douglas sat in his office for a long time. He should feel something. Relief, satisfaction, closure. But all he felt was tired. Kelly found him there an hour later. I heard, she said. Haas called me too. It's really over. How do you feel? Douglas thought about it. Empty. I spent so much energy hating her, planning against her, making sure she could never hurt us again. And now she's just gone. All that rage has nowhere to go. Then let it go, Kelly said, taking his hand. Let her go. She doesn't deserve any more of your time or thought. Kenny's thriving. We're happy. Life is good. That's the real victory. Not that she's dead, but that we survived her. She was right, Douglas knew. The victory wasn't Delia's death or imprisonment. It was Kenny's laughter. It was family dinners. It was the ordinary, beautiful moments of a life she'd tried to destroy and failed. You're right, he said, squeezing her hand. You're absolutely right. They went downstairs together, where Kenny was practicing magic tricks for a school talent show, Gary and Carol offering exaggerated reactions to every card reveal. Douglas joined them, let himself be pulled into the moment, and felt the last pieces of Delia's shadow finally fade. She was gone. His family was here. That was all that mattered. But sometimes, late at night, when he couldn't sleep, Douglas would remember that letter. The threat wrapped in pleasantries. The promise of things changing, of miracles happening. And he'd pull up the news article about Delia's death, reading it again. The stabbing had happened during a cafeteria fight. 3 witnesses. Blood everywhere. A body identified through dental records and fingerprints. All very thorough. All very convincing. Except Douglas knew what Delia had been capable of. Knew how she'd faked paralysis for 3 years. Knew how she'd created false identities and manipulated everyone around her. And he remembered something Agent Haas had said once, early in the investigation. The thing about people like Delia, they always have contingencies. Plans within plans. That's how they survive. Douglas closed the article and told himself he was being paranoid. Delia was dead. The prison officials had confirmed it. The body had been examined. It was over. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that somewhere, in some distant place, Delia Hutchinson was smiling, and planning, and waiting for her next move. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.